Webinar today. Supercharge your public safety applications using interface development. Hopefully that title got your attention without overhyping what we're going to talk about today. We'll get into the content in one moment after we do introductions. First, just some overall logistics for our discussion today. Edwin, would you advance the slide too, please? Okay. We put all of the attendees are currently in listen mode. So your microphones are going to be muted from our side. We would ask if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A section, simply by clicking Q&A at the bottom of your screen. We'll field those questions as we go through and as we get a chance. Please note we are recording this session. So we do want to kind of run through the entire presentation, and we'll handle most of the questions at the end. Rest assured, we will be sending out the slide deck that we're presenting, as well as the recording of today's webinar shortly after the session. Okay, I want to thank everyone for joining. And with that, we will move on to introductions. My name is Jim Pingle. I lead business development and account management here at Mission Critical Partners for our data integration solutions team. One unit of Mission Critical that's really dedicated to data integrations, analytics, kind of the technology side of what we do here at Mission Critical Partners. I am joined by Gary Pulford. Gary manages our partnership programs, primarily for the data integration solutions services that we manage. And Edwin Juarez is also joining us. Edwin is our delivery manager in charge of project management and execution of integration and other technology projects that we manage here at MCP. I'm going to turn this over to Edwin to get us started on our goals for today.
All right, so the learning objectives for today's webinar are the following: the old and new ways to do interface developments, ideas for taking the complexity out of the interface developments, definition of what an API is and why you should care about them, and Mission Critical Partners Data Integration Partnership Program, which, well, Gary will talk about later today. But basically, in short, we just want everyone here to walk away with new ideas on how to plan, budget, implement, and manage your interfaces. So the next part is the actual interface development, which Jim will talk about.
Okay.
Both of us.
Thanks again. So we will start just by outlining what a typical interface involves for any given information system. At the risk of oversimplifying this, we're going to use kind of or overgeneralize. We're going to use kind of a simplified graphic just to explain each aspect of interface development. So assume that, so we're going to use the monitor diagram or icon on the left-hand side of this diagram to represent your information system. That could be a law enforcement records management system, could be computer-aided dispatch, it could be a court or prosecutor's case management system. The line of business application that your folks use every day for inputting information. You rely on information from outside partners to populate the case data or the event data in that system, and you produce output, whether that's information that's going to be shared with other applications and other agencies, or whether it's some sort of reporting. Again, that monitor on the left-hand side, we're going to use that throughout this series of diagrams to represent your system. On the right-hand side, we're going to use the green box to represent, we'll call it the target system or target application. In the case, if your system is sending information to another system, this is the to system. This is where the information is bound. Note these diagrams assume your system, when we're talking about your environment, is going to be the sender. Most of this is true in reverse if your system is the recipient, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So if we start on the left with your application and your need to share information, each one of the interfaces, and if you're familiar with, if you manage one of these systems, you recognize that it's not just one interface, it's probably dozens of interfaces into and out of your system. Each one of those is going to have a series of requirements. It's more than just throwing data over the wall and hoping it sticks on the other side, the other application. The first step clearly is pulling information out of your system. So there are a magnifying glass icon at the top there talks about obtaining event data. Actually, well-designed interfaces also are not just a batch of updates that goes across from one system to another, but driven by a business event. That could be saving a court case or saving a court order in your case management system. It could be triggering a CAD event to be sent to a records management system or shared with another CAD system in your environment. First step is always obtaining that correct data to send to the other system. The second, in the next box below, is building a structured message. So both of these systems have to agree on how to communicate that information. What information is to be included in the interface, as well as the specific format of how that data is going to be encoded or built to be sent so that it can, the receiving system can make sense of it. Once that's done, the next step is to make sure that the data is going to be protected en route from one system to the other. So security, encryption of the data, how that connection between the systems is going to be secured. Once that's established, now we're ready to send the message. Maybe a little more sophisticated than a paper airplane, but it always suffices as an icon in these kind of presentations. This involves connecting to the target system, the system that you wish to share with. And again, there are a myriad of different types of connection connectivity protocols, different ways that systems can communicate with each other. This may be over a dedicated line. This may be over something like your local EZNet. It may be just over the plain internet with appropriate security and protections. Finally, at the bottom, at the end of any given interface, a well-designed interface is going to include a response message, a communication back from the recipient to the sender. This sort of response can achieve two purposes. First of all, it's going to send an acknowledgement. If the information goes over and is stored, processed successfully by the receiving system, we want an acknowledgement or a message of that success to be conveyed back to the sender. So you can close the loop on that transaction and know that it's been delivered appropriately. Second function, of course, is if there is an error, whether one system can't connect to the other one and there's a network outage perhaps, or if there's actually business data errors within the data that's being sent. So in other words, if the data needs to be corrected and resent, that can be conveyed in a response message where the sender can actually correct that information and resend it back. If you're familiar with e-filing in the courts world, there are acknowledgement messages or receipts that'll come back from an e-filing system back to the filer. That's going to tell them that either the court accepted the filing or with specific instructions to fix that filing and resend it. So that's an example of a good actionable response message that makes sure that the sender knows what they have to do to make sure that's sent. So that's kind of an overview, kind of an anatomy of an interface. Now, as far as the impacts on your system, I'll let Edwin walk through a couple of additional comments here.
All right. So as Jim mentioned, that you see on the left-hand side there with the safety application, there's a lot of complex requirements in order to implement and develop an interface, which can lead to quotes with a lot of assumptions, right? Level of effort for an interface that you don't necessarily know what functionality and requirements you want out of an integration between two different applications. So costs can vary, which can also lead to additional effort and cost. When that leads to uncertainty, leads and scope creep, right? You've got an interface, you want to integrate with another application, but you don't necessarily know all the functionality and requirements that's available on two different sides. So at the beginning of the contract or the beginning of an interface, there's a lot of uncertainty, which then leads to requirement changes. So you find out like, hey, I didn't realize this application can do so-and-so functionality. I really like that. I would like to see that come over from our applications to theirs, or vice versa when I want to receive data. And then when that occurs, that's already past the contract phase, right? You realize that you purchased an interface and you want more out of it. So then there's a change order. which could either lead to a new additional cost or a new unbudgeted capital project. So those are some of the ways that developing an interface can impact with how it's done today.
So certainly what we try to do is illustrate the complexity and some of the uncertainties, some of the unknowns that you're starting with building a new interface. Or as another example, say you're replacing your records management in your CAD system and you have a myriad of interfaces that you need to reestablish that were connected to the old system that you need to create for the new system. Again, this could be dozens of different interfaces. So that process, that complexity, and kind of that stack of requirements, if you will, can be different for every one of the systems. So in this diagram, we've abstracted your system a little bit, and we show in the 3 boxes on the right side, different applications. We color them differently just to try to communicate that these are 3 different systems, 3 different partners that you need to integrate with. That set of requirements, from how the data is formatted to how it's secured and how it's communicated across the network or the internet, those can all be different. So you can imagine, and I'm sure you understand this, working with your systems vendor, that complexity compounds and creates even more challenges in terms of project management and resource management for your system provider or your vendor. Edwin?
All right, so complex solutions, right? Jim mentioned that each interface can be different. Like you're trying to integrate an interface with so many different applications out of your one solution. And some of these are one-offs, right? You have a solution that you just purchased and you want to interface with a homegrown solution, which could be very custom, right, to what they need. Or you're trying to interface with a new market vendor that's out there promoting their solution. So then there's that one-off that we're trying to integrate and make repeatable. And as you've seen with technology, the vendors are revamping their solution, going to the cloud, moving to a new way of interfacing with their application. So a lot of developments, a lot of requirements gathering, which can compound the challenges that the vendor has to then have to consume, right? Now they're like, oh, there's something else that I need to interface with. Never done that before. Or I've worked with this vendor before, but they have a new solution. So that's going to cost, and it's going to be additional effort on our side. So at the end, it just adds to the vendors or their background a huge footprint to additional efforts that they need to focus on. That's not their primary system. So now they have to put in all this effort to focus on integrating with all these other one-offs or very complex solutions, which can take away from their main system. So that's that's the level of complexity that's all included with all these types of integrations. Oh, you're muted, Jim.
Thanks, Edwin. So this complexity and this resource demand on the vendor community is nothing new, and certainly a problem that we've all been aware of in this space for a long time and trying to resolve. And one of the very promising trends in IT over the last several years has been the proliferation of application programming interfaces, or APIs. So basically what an API does is it's a way that your vendor can publish the rules of engagement, how information is going to be made available from that system outbound, as well as how to provide information back to your system inbound when your systems are receiving system in an exchange or in an interface. So what the vendor has been able to do is say, here are the rules, here's the information that's going to be available, and any third party, whether that's an integrator or whether that's the individual clients or customers, can pull information from that API. It's usually available as a secure connection over an internet site or a portal, and actually push information back into your system. So that's been a big innovation for the records management or any of the system application vendors. Some of them are more advanced in this, but it certainly helps to identify or reduce those resource constraints and that backlog that everyone was talking about that our vendor partners are all experiencing. And the trends really caught on, and beginning really to catch on in the public safety and criminal justice market as well. Now, that's a great solution for managing the information in and out of the information system. However, it does not simplify the rest of that stack of requirements. Each one of those target systems, each one of your partner agencies that you want to share information with, still have those specific requirements, specific needs for how the data is formatted, how it's secured, how it's going to be communicated across the wire. So the upshot can be, on the positive side, a more streamlined approach for project implementation for your vendors. And that's great. That allows the vendors to focus on what they are the best at and what you hired them to do, which is providing a best-in-class line of business system, CAD, records management, case management system. That's their focus. That's what they're good at. And we really ought to let them be the best at what they are good at. So Edwin, if you go to the next slide, here at Michigan Mission Critical Partners, as consultants, as your partners in solving integration and other sorts of business and technology problems, we've been working with the vendor community and project managing these sorts of interface projects for a long time. And recognizing that API trend is positive, we're also trying to think through other ways that we can help manage this complexity. Trying to do what we can to share the load with those records management vendors. Again, let them focus on what they're good at. Let somebody like us focus on the interface and the exchange work that involves coordinating between two or more partners. So some of the keys to overcoming some of these other problems are reusability, repeatable processes, and really trying to isolate those specific interface requirements where they can be a separate solution and not burden the records management, case management vendors. Okay, so the idea of a simple, small, lightweight interface software component that can be deployed right next to the application. So between your sending application and this interface component, the two gray boxes on the left side of the diagram, no internet connection, no connection across the network, no reason for encountering all those security and encryption issues. This is a secure connection between these two systems. Really what we do is break down the interface complexity into two sides, if you will. One is the problem of the data exchange with your source, with your system, with the application. This part of the component can take advantage of those APIs, or it can establish a much simplified manner of exchanging the data that needs to be exchanged outside of what those structured messaging requirements are in that next box on the right. So the other half of this interface component takes all of those different requirements and really builds those within this component. Rather than asking a systems vendor, an application provider, to handle message formatting, security, receiving those response messages coming back, we can build one component that takes all of that and kind of encapsulates it. Now what you've done is, again, the system vendor is able to focus on the system. Experts at integration can focus on the integration component and also recognize some reusability. So if we go to the next slide, once we've built that interface component that's specific to one type of interface, a few examples could be a CAD to CAD exchange where one CAD system initiates the transfer of a CAD event, whether either to another CAD system or to a records management system, building in the response and the resource availability and some of those other exchanges of information back and forth. That can be one interface component. Another could be a law enforcement system sending its crime statistics to a NIBRS, a crime statistics repository at the state. Another specific purpose-built interface. We call those interface components data link. And what we are doing is building kind of a library, standardizing each one of those interfaces. So now what we do, if we're looking at your sending application, and before we had the system vendor actually building all of those requirements for each one of those interfaces. What we've done is we will provide that application vendor with 3 different data links if there are 3 different interface needs, handling again all that complexity, all those requirements, and all that communication back and forth with the other system. Now, once we have that data link, and again, if you remember, the second half of that data link is how to communicate with, say, the green system or the blue system on the right side of our diagram. Those are going to be reusable regardless of who your partner agency's system vendor is. One vendor can reuse those interfaces across multiple different clients. So again, reusability, repeatability, streamlining that process is the key. And that's really what we're trying to do with this interface component approach to interacting with the individual systems. And really, again, in a vendor neutral way, since any one of these links is available and can easily be communicated with by any vendor provider of one of these systems.
I think just to add to that last point there it's not tied to one technology, right? We're talking about CAD, RMS, all these things, but the data link functionality itself, it can integrate applications of healthcare systems or anything that we want to put, even jail systems.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Another good example is that we're getting some traction on in the last year with COVID and with the need to respond to public health outbreaks is sharing between a jail management system and a state or a regional health and information exchange network. Both of those sides have specific standards and specific interface needs. We're building these components in between to mitigate between those 2 systems. And in a way, again, this can be reusable from one jail to another, from one state to another, with a repeatable approach that, again, streamlines that process. So this kind of flips the script, we think, in terms of not only the burden placed on your system providers, but also in terms of budgeting, financing, and the mechanics, the details of project managing these sorts of approaches. So Edwin's going to walk us through some of the key differences and some of the ways that we can innovate in those areas as well as in the technology area.
All right. So how does budgeting for interfaces now occur, right? You usually have an RFP out for a new solution. Included in that, you have your interfaces you want. So you pay up front as part of the capital project for a new CAD replacement, RMS replacement, a jail system, whatever it is. Interfaces are usually typically included in that cost up front. As part of that, there's a lot of assumptions, right? I mentioned this earlier. Level of effort can vary based on what at the time you know about the integrations you want to achieve. If it's integrated with a new solution, or you're buying a new solution and you've never interfaced with this product before, but you know you want to interface with it now. So there's a lot of assumptions, high level of efforts, low level of efforts, which can then create change orders. So your project management goes out and says like, well, we didn't realize that this interface was going to be this challenging. So there's a change order that we need to do for additional hours to do more development. The other side of that is that there's hidden costs on the other vendor. So you bought a new CAD system and the other vendor the agency who owns the other solution has no idea, but they find out, and then there's a cost with the other vendor says like, hey, there's services that we need in order to integrate with your new solution. So you find out there's additional costs that come along with you buying a solution with an interface, but the other vendor's not knowing about it, and then services that they need to budget for. So you have those. And then a lot of times in the budget, once it's deployed, there's maybe a little bit of support for monitoring it or supporting it, or future requirements changes. Let's say you got the interface is working, and I will bring this up later, but there's a requirement change and there's no cost for that. It's just support for what was delivered and deployed at that time. So the new approach, and now take this over to Gary.
Thanks, Edwin. So the approach we're taking now with that is actually moving the interfaces into an actual services model, where it's a monthly subscription or annual subscription standpoint. This would be incremental to your SaaS type model for one of your systems, but what it does is alleviate those large CapEx projects that tend to have long lead times due to backlogs of interfaces that are being developed across the ecosystem of each of the vendors. That subscription charge covers all the implementation of the software that Jim talked about, as well as monitoring, support, and all the change requirements that Edwin just went through. And it eases that process of, the subscription to those software components actually understand and can accept data from the other platforms to go into your platform itself. So overall, it lowers total cost of ownership. We get better economies of scales by reuse. We have long-term monitoring and updates, and we can support unique, data migration approaches. So is for example, if you're, retiring a legacy platform, we can actually, house information in the cloud and then build an interface to that cold legacy data, as opposed to doing large data conversion projects.
All right. So project managing of interface work now. So when you get the project, it's up to the vendor, the system vendor's responsibility for the entire project management deployment. That includes deploying the main solution, training, data migration, data conversion, interfaces, everything that's involved with that. Typically, interfaces are not the primary focus, right? Because their main solution is the primary solution, and the training for the users to be able to use their solution, which then means that interfaces are viewed as just additional development backlog. And when we've seen that, it can lead to delivery delays because you need an interface, but it is added to the vendor's backlog of development efforts. So the other part of that is that there's lack of visibility on the other side, right? They're not engaged with the other solution that we're trying to interface with, right? They're just responsible for the interface that's part of the main product and integrating to another application. So there's not a lot of visibility on the other side. And as I mentioned earlier, once the interface is live, basically it is in support mode for what was delivered at that moment. So if there's some requirements change where the vendor on the other side or application says like, hey, I added some new features, and I want to see if I can make this work, or we have a new API that we're going to move off to, it's our same solution, but we're moving off from a legacy interface, but we want to go to an API. Those are all scope changes and requires a change order, right, or another project to get additional efforts changed after deployment. So the new approach. So you're going to have an integration expert in the middle, right? That's mission critical partners. We're here to put those pieces together right in the middle for just the interfaces, right? Our main focus is the interfaces. It's a single point of contact responsible for working with both sides, right? We're trying to get both things connected and working together. We have a consistent approach to developing all of the interfaces. So this is the part where Jim's talking about repeatable, reusable, keeping it the same. And so we also even offer other services where we can help write a spec if it doesn't exist. Sometimes we are at the point where we don't even have somebody who has the time to go and gather the requirements, gather the information that's needed for translating specifications or mapping of those items. So we'll help reduce complexity for those type of things. And then post-implementation. So once our data lake is in place or the interface, if there's additional scope requirements, we can handle that through our support, right? The whole purpose of our solution is to be very, very lightweight and be able to handle a lot of those changes in an efficient manner. And then I'm going to give this over to Gary to talk about the partnership program that we're currently working at here at Mission Critical Partners.
So part of the partnership program is really looking at it from a vendor's perspective that supports you as end customers. And some of the benefits of this, the vendors is we handle this in a very simplified, lightweight interface, as Jim talked about. This is designed as a monthly recurring software subscription model. We're seeing a large trend for all the vendors actually that are moving into this type of SaaS model. So it just layers on top of that. No different than you're migrating away from large CapEx projects into more OpEx projects. We can support environments that are both, on-prem, hybrid, and cloud-only environments. So hybrid meaning part of your solution's in the cloud, part of your solution is on-prem. Becomes to be a much more predictable cost because it's an established monthly recurring or annual recurring fee. MTP is part of our monitoring is we also help handle the clarifying accountability. So if the interface is not working, it's breaking somewhere, we can actually notify, there's an issue, but also identify what the issue is. So it helps eliminate the finger pointing between different vendors. And by building this catalog, it reduces the delays caused by developing the interfaces kind of as one-off projects each time. When you want to move forward. So as part of the partner program, we're covering the entire ecosystem, everything from public safety, law enforcement, where you're seeing CAD, RMS, call handling, next gen 911, into courts, justice and corrections area, and all the kind of the flow of data in that ecosystem, as well as the cloud providers, the Microsofts, the Azures, or the AWS of the world. Currently, we're working with over 25 vendors in the program in some stage of the process. The relationships with the vendors can be, we provide the data link through the vendor as part of their solution, or we can work directly with the customers. And there's varying vendors that want different type of business models to support their customers. We have a lot of experience. We've developed over 1,200 interfaces over the last 10 plus years. And in the process, we're creating a catalog of interfaces, which ultimately reduces costs and also increases the speed to deployment.
Okay, thank you, Gary. I'm going to wrap this up. So we've got a little bit of a summary here. Legacy approach, new innovative approach. But I want to start by reiterating a point that hopefully we've made clear throughout this presentation. And that is none of this that we're talking about is to put your system vendors, your providers of records management, CAD, case management, any of those vendors in a negative light. This proliferation of information and of the need to absorb and share massive amounts of information has really channeled this, focused this problem, created a problem for your system implementers. And again, we want to free them up to be good at what they are good at. See ourselves and frankly, other integrators like us as partners with the provider, with the systems provider community, the vendors, as well as with the individual practitioners and the community of practitioners that needs to share information at a local or at a state level. So again, what we put forward here is a way of kind of recognizing the problems that the proliferation of information creates and exacerbates, and then trying to come up with fresh thinking about how to resolve them. And as Gary mentioned, this has a lot of traction really with the vendor community. So in summary, the funding, we have the opportunity to kind of shift that from either a capital expenditure model, if there is a large records management or systems replacement project in place, that can certainly be used to develop and implement these interfaces. But on an ongoing basis, you can also kind of avoid that capital expenditure requirement and build a very manageable stream of funding into an operational budget to manage these. Again, as Edwin went through, the development, the deployment, the project management approaches are really different and really, again, focused on sharing the burden of that work and being smart about how we build reusable, repeatable components to address it. I also want to call attention to that notion of monitoring. So how do we achieve that? And Gary did a good job of pointing out how the provider of a component like ours becomes the single point of accountability. I repeated the data link diagram here at the bottom because each one of those data links actually comes with a user interface that you as the customer or that we as the provider can use to log in and see the flow of messages into and out of that link. We can see any problems, any things that's not getting delivered, troubleshoot remotely by logging into that individual data link component. And then also to manage if requirements change. And I mentioned NIBRs a while ago. If you're in law enforcement and familiar with crime statistics, those NIBRs requirements have some, can change over time. A lot of states are going to publish an update every year to their crime statistics reporting requirements. That support, that ongoing subscription service actually covers our going in and updating that data link to keep up with and to accommodate those changes in requirements, generally on an annual basis. So all of that is part of that subscription fee. Okay. And that does it for our presentation today. Again, we would love to entertain any questions that you have. I don't see anything in the chat or in the QA window. Anybody? Let's see, you do have the capability to raise your hand. So if you do have a question you'd like to ask verbally, please click on that raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. Okay, I'll give you a few more minutes, but we do hope that you've enjoyed and benefited from the presentation today. Hope you're walking away with a little better understanding of what's happening in the world of integration and interface management in criminal justice and public safety. And more importantly, we hope we've given you a few things to think about and take back to the challenges you're facing or the opportunities you have in your day-to-day line of work back at your agency. Edwin, Gary,
Jim,
anything else to add?
Somebody asked, Logan asked if Data Link is FedRAMP certified.
Oh, we haven't had to FedRAMP certify that yet, but we certainly can. Generally, we're going to inherit some of those security protections from the environment in which we're deploying. Recall that the data link is designed to be a small component that's going to be in the same network environment within the same zone as your application. In terms of access, all of our folks that would be supporting that are going to be CJIS background checked at this point, and we can certainly go into more of the FedRAMP additional requirements if we need to.
Yeah, I'll add to that, Jim. I mean,
yeah, thanks.
We follow CJIS and the requirements for CJIS. The FedRAMP side of it typically is more of a federal cloud environment that you're certifying, not necessarily the applications. I understand that FedRAMP is starting to move towards the application, but I don't believe it's actually there yet.
Okay, great, thank you. And Gary, the same question about NIST.
I believe we are NIST 853 cert compliant, but I'd have to confirm that.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get back to you on that, Logan. Jules also had a question about the 25 plus vendors, 25 interfaces that we're working on. We'll include our current list of those interfaces that we've developed. The partners, the vendor is still in the process of securing the approval to publish that list, but that'll be available on our website going forward.
And if there's a set of vendors that you're looking to see if we have the ability to support, please just send us a note and we'll get back to you.
Yeah, good point, Gary. Okay. One last chance for questions. I don't see any hands raised. Nothing new in the chat or QA. Again, everyone, thanks very much for your time. Feel free to reach out to us. Go ahead, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.